Welcome to the Great Telco Debate 2020. It's day one and we are live on TelecomTV and also streaming on our favourite social media platform, LinkedIn. I'm Guy Daniels, and for the next hour I will try and guide us through two debates with the help of my colleagues Ray Lemaitre and Chris Lewis. Plus the full TelecomTV crew is busy off camera doing all the difficult work. Now, we're not all meeting face-to-face in London this year, but we are still determined to give you a proper Great Telco Debate experience. We've split the event over 3 days, Tuesday through to Thursday, and we'll be featuring two debates each day. So, sit back, take a break from your company team calls and Zoom meetings, and for the next 60 minutes, join us and our guests for the Great Telco Debate. Our first debate for this year, in fact, is drawing on the experience of 2020, what will really change? Chris, why are we having this debate? What do we hope to learn?
Well, Guy, we traditionally start the Great Telco Debate with a scene setter, a state of the nation, state of the industry. And of course, we typically dig into 5G and AI and all those things that have shaped the industry. This year, that topic, of course, has been hijacked by coronavirus. And so one of the questions here is, what lessons have we learned? How have we as an industry stepped up to the mark to support society during this unbelievable change in patterns of usage and so on? And how does that prepare us for the future and the role that we take in that broader digital economy?
Thank you, Chris. And hopefully our viewers have already watched the panel discussions and witness statements. If you haven't yet seen these programmes, then do view them later. They really help in setting the scene for these live sessions. All 6 programmes are available to watch on demand here on TelecomTV. Of course, this being the Great Telco Debate, we have a motion. And our first motion is 2020 has been a pivotal year for the telecoms industry. As they have done every year, Chris and co-presenter Graham Wild set out their arguments for and against, and here's a summary.
The telecoms industry has done exceptionally well in standing up new capabilities which were unexpected and unforeseen, and it's responded amazingly well to the demands placed on it by society as a whole and by governments. And there's been a need to rejig capacity and put capacity in different places, away from city centres and into the suburbs. And the industry's coped remarkably well with that. So I think that the industry is transforming itself through COVID, and it's also underpinning the needs of society.
The industry is failing to understand that it needs to find a new position, if you like, in the digital hierarchy and understand where the real value lies, where the real value is created. So delivering and serving that underlying plain old broadband service is actually where the industry needs to go. Very few, if any, have succeeded in moving into adjacent market. What COVID has done has taken us away from understanding some of the underlying trends which are really challenging the industry going forward.
We'll soon find out the results of the viewer vote, but before we do, we have time for a further round of questions. And I'm delighted that many of our expert witnesses have returned for our live shows. And we're also joined by some new faces, all of whom have plenty of experience and views to share. Now, half our guests are here with Chris and me, and the other half are over with Ray. We've mixed things up to ensure we get a great debate. So let's welcome Howard Watson, Chief Technology and Information Officer for BT Group. Jean-Yves, who is Director of the Board of Digicel and also Chairman of Shareability. Andrea, Dona, Head of Networks UK at Vodafone. Darrell Jordan-Smith, SVP Industries and Global Accounts with Red Hat. And Phil Mottram, VP Communications and Media Solutions at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Welcome everyone, good to see you all again. Now it's over to my colleague Ray Lemaitre and his gallery of guests. Hello Ray.
Great. Thanks very much, Guy.
Had your Christmas lights switch on already then?
Absolutely. In a way, I'm channeling Game of Thrones a little bit here. But yes, the Christmas lights have been on in the Lemaitre household for a few weeks now. I feel like I'm even getting a late year suntan. But enough of the weather talk. Let's move on straight to the questions we have from the gallery here today with our industry experts with questions for their peers. So first of all, I would like to ask our first guest to introduce the first question. And that guest is Attilio Zanni, who's Executive Director of the Telecom Infra Project, or TIP. Attilio, what is your question, please?
Thanks, Ray, and thanks for the participants in the session. I think the content was extraordinary. The insights that you brought were great, so thank you for that. We heard in that content that in some cases, telcos and organizations are seeing productivity rise over the last year during the pandemic. And I wonder whether that's an effect, or if the panel can discuss whether that's the effect of a Herculean effort by individuals and teams working harder all around the clock to make things work, or is this mode of working that we're experiencing right now just simply more effective and more efficient?
Okay, great. Thanks, Attilio. Well, Guy, here's a working from home question for the industry. So over to you to get the debate going with your guests in the studio.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Great first question from Attilio. Phil, I think you're probably suited to answer this one first for us.
Yeah, sure. So Phil Mottram from Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and the division that I run has about 5,000 software engineers that build software for telcos around the world. Obviously, one of the things that we were concerned about when we went into the pandemic was the impact that working from home might have on productivity, and in particular, the teams that are developing software for customers. And actually, we were pleasantly surprised that productivity improved. And I don't think it was down to a Herculean effort per se. I mean, I think our teams were really focused on making sure that they delivered for customers on time. But I think that once people settled into the new way of working, they just found it was more flexible. And off the back of that, they could pick and choose, really which times worked for them to work hardest. I think that all came together in increased productivity for all the teams and ultimately our customers.
Thanks, Phil. I wonder if any or either of our UK operators representatives might chime in on this one. Howard?
Thank you for that. I mean, I think I would say that there was a Herculean effort, and I would like to thank our organisation and the UK telco organisation in general for responding to that, because certainly in those first few weeks, rebalancing the traffic on the network. I mean, actually, if I recall back, the biggest rebalance we did was actually mobile phones were calling fixed lines significantly more than they had been before. So actually rebalancing interconnects was the key thing. But also, I think we did find organizations working at their best. And I think actually that was driven by the clarity of a really common purpose that everybody understood. And actually leaders in the organization did their best to get out of the way and be true servant leaders, enabling people on the front line to do great things with what Chris described as plain old broadband. He says growing through his teeth. But I think plain old broadband became really essential, and we're all thankful that it worked brilliantly.
Thank you, Howard. And Andrea, you wanted to come in on this one as well.
Yes, I wanted to add to what Howard said. I think it's really important that when we realized we were working in a remote situation, we increased our focus on doing it right first time, knowingly conscious of the fact that we didn't have a second chance. We didn't have a chance to physically intervene in person. That heightened our attention to detail, especially considering the important job we were doing at a point of national emergency. So I think it's really important to take those learnings and translate it into a more sustainable culture of doing it first right, knowing that you don't have a second chance, and making that part of your DNA going forward.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Look, great start to the debate. I think we'll hand it back to Ray, though, who's got a load of other questions, I'm sure, to put to us. Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I think Attilio just wants to come back with a couple of comments. And maybe, Attilio, you can say whether you think this working from home and productivity is going to go beyond 2020.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a new mix. Thanks, Ray. I think this new mix is effectively going to be a learned experience through 2020. And I think we'll become more effective at working remotely in teams and cross organizations. You know, our work is in the Telecom Info project is about fostering and causing collaboration in a very practical way. I think there's a latent demand, though, and a latent necessity, especially in the area of innovation and doing things in a different way in telecoms, that will require us to get around a whiteboard at some stage and have a debate and discourse in a more person-to-person way. So I'm certainly looking forward to that. And I think there's some efficiency that can be gained from that in the mix.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thanks, Attilio. And let's move swiftly on to the next question. And this comes from our next gallery guest. That's Tony Sceales, Head of 5G Program Development at DCMS. So, Tony, what is your question for today's expert witness panel?
Thanks, Ray. This is really a question that comes from the dominant theme of 2020 of obviously our handling the crisis. So during 2020, then, what's changed about communications and technology in support of health and care? And I would like to separate those two items, if you don't mind. So health and social care, and during this year, and what are those changes permanent?
Okay, thanks, Tony. So a very sort of focused question there from Tony. Guy, back over to you to the studio to see if we've got any thoughts on this topic.
Yep, thanks, Ray, and thanks, Tony, for the question. Any takers from our experts here as to who could maybe address the health and care issue? What's changed? Any? Yes, Darrell, please.
Thank you. So from our perspective at Red Hat in particular, we have done a lot of work with different healthcare organizations and professionals from a healthcare perspective in terms of how that's delivered. We're seeing a lot more interaction over video-based technologies and secure-based platforms to move data around so people can feel very confident in being able to do that. We think that's going to be very sustainable because I think a lot of people have realized a trip to the doctor or a trip to the hospital isn't always necessary. And with an appropriate and acceptable mean of being able to communicate in a safe way is I think, going to change a lot of the things that we do around healthcare. In addition to that, we're seeing different ways of actually administering healthcare in terms of physically, interacting with procedures and other such things. So we think that the hospitals and the systems that we've been putting in place, leveraging a lot of what we're doing around 5G based technologies, 4G based technologies, fixed wireless convergence, those technologies are going to change the way that we actually receive treatment. So we've seen interesting examples as far as Japan and in North America and in Europe, where we've actually been deploying lots of those newer technologies at a much faster rate than we have seen before. And the feedback we've had is that's going to be very sustainable.
Thank you, Darrell. I'm going to go in a minute to Chris, but first of all, Jean-Yves, please.
Yes, Guy, I wanted to give another perspective, and that is the corporate social responsibility programs of telcos in emerging markets. COVID has had a very significant impact, not only on the healthcare systems that are relatively minimal in some of these emerging markets, but more importantly is all those requiring social care and dropping out of the system. And I think more than ever before, telcos, large telcos have a moral, ethical duty to ensure that their corporate social responsibility programs are very much focused on providing the appropriate level of reinvestment in communities and in social care. And we do that second to none at Digicel through a number of foundations that we operate to ensure that schools are continuing to run, that children are educated, that handicapped children receive the appropriate care. And I think that's a really important dimension for telecom operators as a result of COVID.
Absolutely is. Thank you, Jean-Yves. Chris, what's your views on this?
So I think it's really important that as an industry, we tend to get very carried away with the penetration numbers, how we're over 100% penetration. We're actually, what's come out during COVID in some of the poorer areas is that actually there is still a lack of connectivity down to the poorest in society. And certainly the example of the Liverpool 5G community network, where they're building a community environment to get low cost, low service connectivity into people's houses for things such as the things that Jean-Yves and I think Andrea mentioned during their witness statements about making sure they take medication correctly and so on. Very relatively low level technology, but actually which will make a massive difference. So I think that's one of the issues I think we need to bear in mind in this debate, is that actually we've still got a long way to go to get connectivity, suitable connectivity, down to everybody in society.
Thanks, Chris. And before we go back to Ray, I'm just going to pop over to Howard.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Chris said there echoed with me a lot. I mean, because I don't think this is really a 5G question per se. I mean, yes, 5G will enable lots of other capabilities. And, we've been working on a connected ambulance, for example, and been doing that in the Midlands. But I do think Chris is right. I think this is about looking at how do we make sure that everybody in the UK has access to a good level of broadband, and we take our responsibility very seriously in that and continue to work with government and the regulator on how do we ensure that that's done to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Howard. I'm going to quickly pop back to Darrell.
I was just going to add something similar to what Howard was saying. Is one of the bigger concerns that we're also seeing in this move to virtual healthcare and virtual treatment is preventative care. There's a lot of concern about how do we make sure preventative care is actually put in place, because in different marketplaces around the globe, there's a huge cost associated with not getting to problems sooner rather than later. So there's a lot of innovation occurring that we're seeing in different communities in terms of how to get to solutions around driving preventative care for not just communities that don't necessarily have all that access, but in other areas as well.
Thank you, everyone. Great comments. Back over to Ray, though, for our next question.
Okay, thanks, Guy. And, Tony asked this question, a very specific question. So, Tony, do you just want to comment maybe on what you've heard there, and whether surely these changes are going to be permanent? They're not going to be rolled back, or do you think there's a possibility that might happen?
No, I think they're permanent. I think that the culture has changed around what we're expecting to see delivered and how we expect to receive care and healthcare with it. But I would like to say a big thank you to the telecoms operators in particular for stepping up during the crisis and helping with making sure that healthcare professional bills and so on were looked after during the crisis. And that's made a big difference. So, and very much appreciated by government, I'm sure. The thing that I think it has shifted is the appreciation that we need the communications to be in the community as much as they do need to be there for the centre in health and care. Much more of this is delivered locally now, and that's not a trend that's going to switch back. So I do think there's a structural change that's happening.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Great points, Tony. Thanks very much. Okay, let's move on to our next question from our gallery today. And this comes from Andrew Coward. He's the CEO of Lumina Networks. So, Andrew, what is your question today, please?
Well, hi there. So one of the paradoxes of the 2020 telecom industry is that while the industry has been so successful in delivering bandwidth, kind of stepping up to all the requirements of working from home, innovation has actually stalled in the sense that a lot of the money that was funding CTO groups has now gone into deployment of equipment. A lot of projects that were about future technologies has basically been put on indefinite hold while that infrastructure gets put into place. So what's the deficit that we've really built this year as a consequence of that in things like 5G and automation and MEC? And how long will it take for us to kind of dig ourselves out of the hole we've created by kind of shifting away from innovation through this year?
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. Well, Guy, back over to you. Quite a provocative question from Andrew there. I'm sure we'll get some response from the main studio.
I would expect nothing less from Andrew for that one, and I'm sure we're already getting 3 cherries up on the machine here. Andrea, let's go to you first for your response.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have actually gathered a deficit. If anything, we've taken the additional demands placed on the telco as a added incentive to accelerate our plans. Now, for sure, we need to take our investment and increase our investment strategy, focus on our investment strategy and the return of that investment. But I think rather than creating a deficit, it's actually focused our minds to do more of what we had already set out to do and do it faster in a much more targeted and focused way. I argued in this debate earlier in the series that as the demands broaden on the telcos and we get asked to do a lot more, shifting traffic, innovating more across various sectors, we have to ask ourselves some difficult investment questions, which don't create a deficit, but actually answer the questions faster on our investment strategy so that we can accelerate.
Thank you, Andrea. Let's go over to Howard as well, please.
Yeah, I mean, I also probably don't agree with the question, at least not the way that it was sort of implied as a result of the coronavirus situation. I do think what has had the potential to affect innovation is the narrowing of the supply chain diversity, if I can phrase things that way, here in the UK. But I also welcome the initiatives that we've got in place now to make sure that actually we replace that with other ways of driving that diversification and ensuring that we have that innovation. And, maybe we'll talk about that in the second topic today. But, I still got researchers in Adastral Park in the BT labs, and they've all been doing what they do throughout this period. We filed as many patents as we did last year by the same time. So we don't see a slowdown in innovation. We see an industry risk actually from the narrowing of the diversity of the supply chain.
Thank you, Howard. And over to Jean-Yves.
I just wanted to give a perspective of what's happening also around the world, and particularly in emerging markets. And I think there are 2 camps right now. Those telcos that are retrenching because obviously prepaid revenues have been hit by the COVID crisis. But we're also seeing a number of telcos accelerate their investments and accelerate innovation. And at Digicel, in fact, that's the choice that we made earlier in the year as a result of COVID. We decided we wanted to innovate more than ever before. We've launched more new services than perhaps in the last 5 years. We've ensured that our networks across the 32 countries we operate in were best in class, and we've won most of the industry awards for the quality of our networks during these crises. So, I think the COVID crisis for many telcos hopefully represents an opportunity to innovate more than ever before and galvanize the teams internally to go that extra mile to launch new services and great quality overall. So we've seen it more as an opportunity, not less.
Thank you, Jean-Yves, especially for adding the more global perspective to this round of answers. Unless anybody else wants to comment, we should perhaps then head back. Yes, we'll head back over to Ray.
Okay, great. Thank you, Guy. I'm just going to see if Andrew would like to come back with any closing comment on this topic at all.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Well, thanks for the comments. So it's kind of heartening to know that that's really been the case. I think at the end of the day, though, there's the kind of zero-sum game when it comes to capex and allocation of that. So it seems to be a case of everybody working harder and scrambling, if you like, and taking advantage of the innovation capabilities that are kind of inherent with what you guys have. I think the real question now is how that then plays out, through next year with the things that were promised for this year that didn't actually come to transpire at the rate that we planned. Knowing that innovation has actually been kind of fundamental to how you've actually executed through this year.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, well, I think we've got time for one more question, Guy. So I'm going to come to Joe Watchell, Chief Technology Officer at Worldwide Technology. So, Joe, what is your question today, please?
Thanks, Ray. So I just had a quick question around the acquisition of spectrum by enterprise customers and how that's going to impact the delivery of services to them in the future.
Okay, great, thanks. So, I guess 2020 has been this has been one of the trends of 2020 that could create a pivotal shift in the telecoms industry. So, Guy, back over to you. Enterprises buying their own spectrum licenses. What kind of impact might this have on the industry?
Thank you, Ray, and thanks to Joe for his question. Let's hear what Phil has to say.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting development on a number of fronts. I think we're going to see a lot of industries that have previously haven't really benefited from network technologies now benefiting way more. So particularly some of the industrial sectors such as oil, gas, automotive, companies with big plants of machinery that previously haven't been able to use network technology to improve productivity. Now they've got this great opportunity. So I think that's one big development. I think the other big development as well that is somewhat linked to this is in support of that, you can see more and more enterprises deploying applications out at the edge. And what that's going to do is really set up a kind of, I don't know whether conflict's too strong a word, but this kind of conflict potentially between hyperscaler who needs to land their cloud platforms out at the edge and also the telco. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see as enterprises adopt this new 5G technology. I think they're the two kind of impacts we're going to see. As say, industries that previously haven't been able to benefit from technology or network technology getting that leapfrog now, but also teeing up this somewhat battle for position between the hyperscalers and the telcos.
Thank you, Phil, and we'll certainly come back to that topic later in the week. But I'm going to go over to Darrell first of all for his comments.
Yeah, no, I want to just echo what Phil was saying. I think from our perspective, we're seeing a lot of software being written to run on different form factors at the far edge of the network, different silicon, different GPUs, different FPGA technologies, which are very relevant in those industries. We're very active in the automobile industry, in the connected car, which probably we won't see the benefits of for another 2 or 3 years. But certainly those industries are going to, grab hold of 5G and, some of the newer innovations around artificial intelligence and machine learning to give us the next wave of innovation in this market segment. So I'm particularly excited about that.
Thank you, Darrell. And before we go back to Ray, Chris, any further comments from yourself?
Well, apart from echoing your comment that Phil's kindly given us links into 2 of the debates coming up, one tomorrow, one on Thursday, around the hyperscalers and around keeping the customers happy, which I think both have some very interesting input. I think the issue that it raises, of course, spectrum is only available for those private networks in certain parts of the world, but it's the opportunity that it raises for the telecoms players to actually build something which addresses a very specific need. And for me, that's part of getting right down and dirty in the ecosystem and working more closely with the other partners. But as I say, we'll come back to that in some of the latter debates.
Yeah, indeed we will. Thanks for that, Chris. And with that, it's back to Ray.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. Well, we've used up sort of about half an hour of the program already. So I think, so we can get on to the second motion of the day. I think we should find out what the guests in today's gallery thought of this motion. So again, reminder, the motion is 2020 has been a pivotal year for the telecoms industry. So for my guests in the gallery, if you can give a thumbs up if you agree, or a thumbs down if you disagree. So let's see, what have we got? We've got quite a lot of, okay, we've got nearly a full house on the thumbs up. We've got a 5-1 for. So Guy, back to you. With that mini vote here, what have we been getting on this motion from the broader TelecomTV audience?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. 5-1, that's pretty good. Well, we'll find out in a second, but before we do, let's ask our guests here as well. 2020 has been a pivotal year for the telecoms industry. That's the motion. What do you reckon? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I'm going to come in with mine controversially. Oh, look at that. It's a clean sweep of the board from the guests there. A pivotal year indeed for the telecoms industry. Okay, look, that's what we all think. But what about our audience? Was our motion carried or was it defeated? It's time for the industry to decide. Wow, there you go. No expense spared on the graphics. 72% in favour for the motion. That is well and truly motion carried, and by a substantial margin. Chris, you argued against the motion. What do you think of the result?
I think the result is not surprising, given it's the industry voting about the industry. I should point out that when we do this for and against motion, we do toss a coin to see who votes for and against it, and I got the against side of the coin. But I think it's important in my comments, I think in the summary we had there, that actually the relative role of the telecoms industry in the broader economy has not changed. Yes, it's improved its position. It's got more awareness through broadband supporting people's lifestyles during lockdown and in different parts of the world. But I think partly to Andrew Coward's point as well, that actually there's not a lot of extra money flowing into the industry. So we're working with a finite pool of money in which to invest and in which to drive the future. So whilst it has given us a good shot in the arm, it's given us a bit more recognition, perhaps establish a bit more value that we provide in the eyes of the customers. I still think there's a question out there as to the relative role of the industry, and we need to think carefully about where we find our relative role in that digital ecosystem going forward.
Yeah, I think I concede. I think it was a fair result. I think it was a pivotal year for telecoms, but I do think there may well be unintended consequences here. I think there's a danger that it pushes telcos back towards being critical communication service providers and heading the utility route. But we'll see. We'll see what 2021 brings. Ray, any final thoughts from you on the motion result?
Well, again, like Chris, not a great surprise. I thought Chris made a very good argument against, actually. I think what is key here for the industry is that the greater visibility and the greater appreciation, I think, of the communications industry, that's seized upon and taken through into 2021 and beyond. Let's not drop the advantage gained from what has been absolutely stellar work from this industry in 2020. So I would be a thumbs up for sure.
Well said, Ray. So that's the first debate of today and indeed this year concluded. But don't go away because we promised you 2 debates today. So let's get straight into our second one, which focuses on the Open Telco and asks the question, how can we harness the innovation required to revamp the network? Chris, why this debate? What's at stake for the industry?
Well, Guy, we've seen enormous column inches looking at the question of open. And I think during the statements from the various witnesses, we heard about the different flavours of open, indeed how open and honest perhaps sometimes some of the suppliers are. So the question is, what does this openness do for the telecom industry? How do we define it, of course? But the interest is, often we get carried away with looking at things like Open RAN very specifically. But more broadly, as we move towards a more software-centric telecom industry, how open is open and what advantages does it bring? And does it open up the ecosystem for delivering innovation, services, and improving that relative role of the telecoms players going forward?
Thank you, Chris. And of course, every great telco debate needs a motion. And our second motion today is, A more open telco is at odds with the simplification of the supplier roster. Well, here's a summary of what Chris and Graham Wild argued for when we introduced the debates last week.
We don't need to emphasize what's going on within the telecom organization. We need to simplify that. And in my mind, that's at odds with having a wide range, a plethora of suppliers feeding into the ecosystem. I believe that we're going to have a shortened supplier roster in order to deliver against the services requirement of the future.
It's not incompatible to have an open architecture with a number of different players, in some cases some large systems integrator players, may deliver programs which incorporate innovation and new suppliers using open technology, and that will be to the benefit of the telcos and to their customers.
We'll soon find out the results of the viewer vote. Will it be another landslide? But before we do, we have time for a final round of questions. Our industry guests are still with us, so let's get right to it. Ray, over to you for our first question for this second debate.
Absolutely, and what a great debate it is. So let's get straight on. The first question we have here from the guests in the gallery is from Mike Ouellette. He is Senior Director of Engineering Operations at NetNumber. So Mike, let's hear your question, please.
Great, thank you, Ray. My question has to do with how a more open telco impacts security strategies, specifically around any additional or special considerations given the increased use of open source software, and whether there are growing concerns over data privacy with more open APIs.
Okay, absolutely fantastic question to start this particular debate. Guy, so security in the open telco, back over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ray. Great question. Thanks, Mike. Now, who'd like to tackle our first question? Andrea, thank you for volunteering.
My view on open is that precisely because it's open, you need to acknowledge security implications or security aspects by design from the word go. So although it might sound counterintuitive, because it's open, it's more vulnerable to security. Precisely because it's open, you need to secure it by design because of its very nature of being open. So you're shining a light from the start, and there's no hiding, and therefore it will be more secure.
Thank you, Andrea. Great comment. Darrell, over to you.
So I have to come off mute. So this year we've seen something in the industry called zero trust. And zero trust is actually built on the fact that the software is open. In some instances, it may be open source software, which we at Red Hat are heavily involved in. Other software just may be open from an API perspective. But what we're seeing is openness actually drives that level of transparency that is required, and the level of trust that needs to occur. And we certainly think that being open and having a large number of vendors working together provides choice, and with choice we actually drive better solutions for the marketplace and then our customers. And we're seeing the systems integrators take a much bigger role in pulling all these pieces together. So just because you might have lots of different vendors with lots of different solutions which have an underlying security aspect, we're seeing the integrators pulling that together under a single zero trust secure envelope.
Thank you very much, Darrell. Unless any of other guests want to chime in, we'll head back to Ray. Let's head back to Ray.
Okay, thanks, Guy. And Mike, do you want to come back with any comments maybe on what you've heard or your observations from the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ray. I would definitely agree with the topics around innovation and choice that we have here with a more open telco. I can certainly appreciate the emphasis on security by design as being a critical component as we look forward to a more open telco.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Mike. And I know that that NetNumber is doing a lot of work in this area, so great to hear from you. Okay, so next question from the gallery guest today is from Nathan Rader, who is VP of Cloudified Production at Deutsche Telekom. Nathan, what is your question for your peers here at the Great Telco Debate today? Oh, Nathan, I think if you can just hit your unmute button. Yeah, I think you got it twice.
I got it twice, yep. So sorry, my question is particularly related to how Open promises to bring more vendors, newer vendors, as touched upon in the motion, but at the same time, it has the tendency to bring added complexity, as highlighted previously, that there may need to be systems integrations and such like that. And so my question is, do we feel that Open is going to cause the industry to accelerate or actually slow the industry down as it has to deal with these additional complexities?
Okay, great question there. Great question. Thanks, Nathan. Guy, back over to you. What do our guests in the studio think of this?
Yeah, thanks, Ray, and thank you indeed, Nathan. Well, we've got a couple of takers. Let's go to Phil first of all. There's the whole question of openness and complexity.
Yeah, look, I think one of the great advantages of 5G is it obviously is a more open technology, and the standard was obviously heavily steered by the telecoms operators because they wanted to take the benefit of being able to mix and match different network functions from different suppliers. And at HPE, we developed some of those network functions in particular for the 5G core network. And what we're finding is that customers kind of tend to sit in a number of different camps. I think for some of the large telcos, they do have the capabilities in-house to be able to mix and match the network functions, do the integration themselves, and also support multiple vendors across this platform. So I think for those players, they're driving the innovation and also driving companies like HPE to continue investing in these network functions. But we're also seeing other players saying, do you know what, we don't have the capability to be able to knit together potentially 20 different vendors and have them all integrated and operated under one environment. So we're seeing kind of a number of different camps. My sense is that the general trend in the industry is going more towards open. So I think over time, you'll see continued investment and therefore continued adoption by suppliers and by telcos across the world.
Thank you, Phil. And Howard, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point Phil makes there is a really good one, which is it just put certainly more, I feel like it will put more onus on us to be, continuing to act as good system integrators. I do think to the relative pace, I think initially there is a speed up opportunity here, and we can see the initiatives that are happening now. I do worry though that, if you have that sort of rich multi-vendor environment, that there is a risk of end-to-end adding new capability, particularly big capability, could actually slow down a little bit and require ever more testing, and whether that's security testing or functional testing. So I think that is, a critical challenge here. We've also got to make sure it is properly open. I mean, let's not forget that in our existing networks, the X2 interface between two eNode Bs, or in the 5G equivalent, is an open standard interface, yet we've not been able to mix suppliers across either side of that interface and get it to work well. So it's a tough thing to do this, and I think it's going to be a fantastic journey. And I'm actually going to say a fantastic journey through the next decade. Because I do think some things will take quite a while to get to the point where we can really innovate really quickly in a totally open environment.
Great points. Thank you very much, Howard. Let's get Jean-Yves' perspective as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more perspective to this, and this is the boardroom perspective, because whilst we're focusing very much on technology, one of the key issues that will be debated at the boardroom level is not just the technology dimension of openness and these new open platforms, but fundamentally the robustness of these companies that are going to provide these open systems. And that, I think, as we see a multiplication of vendors in these type of open environments, is really going to be a concern at the boardroom level, whether these companies will be around for 5 or 10 years to continuously support these open building blocks.
Very good point. Thanks very much for that. Let's head back to Ray.
Okay, great, thanks. And Nathan, do you want to come back and make some comments of your own on this topic?
Yeah, I can agree with almost all three parties that touched on this topic. I do agree that dealing with smaller companies, they have the tendency to kind of overpromise and sometimes underdeliver because they just don't have as many resources, and they're also open to be acquired, which then changes the dynamics of the industry and why you went with them in the first place. I also tend to agree with some of the others where the speed will happen over time, and there is a great benefit of open where multiple operators, multiple companies, multiple vendors are all contributing to open, and that will provide sort of an acceleration as you will. But I think to Howard's point, we do have to have that honest bit about open, is that there's a lot of talk around open, but not everything is open, as he alluded to in the X2 interface. And so we have to be honest with ourselves that open is just potentially another form of lock-in for us, just in a different package.
Yeah, absolutely. So many debates and conversations around that topic, and it's going to be really interesting over the next few years to see how that plays out and the examples we get and the interest. So great comments, Nathan. Thanks very much. So next question from the gallery is from, we're going back to Tony Sceales from the DCMS. Tony, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. My question is, what do the panelists think will be the impact of 5G on the delivery of the Open Telco? And will we see more partnership from the telcos as a result?
Okay, great question. 5G and the Open Telco, do they go together initially, later, at all? What's the impact? Guy, over to you.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks for the question, Tony. Well, let's go first of all over to Darrell. What do you think of the impact of 5G on the Open Telco?
Well, I think we're seeing, through initiatives like ORAN, telecommunications companies working much closer together to drive common standards in an open manner, sharing that infrastructure. And we're seeing a lot of momentum with ORAN and RAN itself with respect to 5G. So I think from our perspective, we're pretty encouraged by that. There's obviously behind that a lot of geopolitical issues that are driving some of that need to strive for openness that we're also keen to participate in. So that's from my perspective where we're seeing that.
Thank you. And Howard, would you like to address Tony's points as well?
I mean, just quickly, the timing has worked out really well because 5G, as a new radio standard, has come and at the same time as, from a core perspective, so in the end-to-end 5G ecosystem, we can also take advantage of, cloudifying the network core, and in our case, introducing what we call network cloud. And I think that gives us that sort of cloud native infrastructure to be able to adopt the functions and be able to, deploy, remove, redeploy functions in a way that we've not been able to do before. So I think that the fact that that's coincided in terms of technology timing, I think does mean that 5G is a catalyst for openness.
Thank you, Howard. I'm just going to ask Chris a similar point there. Are you seeing in the work that you do, Chris, that 5G could well be a catalyst for the Open Telco?
Personally, I see 5G as a metaphor for the future of the whole industry, Guy. And by that, I mean that aiming towards what 5G can deliver, having to put the right fiber infrastructure in place in order to support that new radio access network, as Howard says. All of that combined with the cloudification and the openness that we're seeing from projects like the Telecom Infra project or the Open API architecture stuff work that the TM Forum is doing. All of this is starting to draw some of the benefits from the openness and the more software-centric approach in order to build towards that future of 5G. And so in that sense, yes, I think if 5G weren't on the table as much as it is today, I think we would still be doing many of the same things, because that aim is to try and build that more flexible, agile network and set of services around it, which, so benefiting from the technologies that come in from more of the IT world, let's say, rather than some of the more proprietary stuff that we had in the telecom world in the past. So yeah, I do think it is driving it, but I think it's a long journey.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, back to Ray.
Okay, and I think Tony wants to come back in and just make a few comments following the responses to his question. So, Tony.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, I think we're seeing it across the trials and that we're doing in testbeds and trials within the government, and I think we're seeing a big appetite for players to come into this market and work together and collaborate in a way which we haven't really seen very much of before, catalyzed by 5G as both a moment and a technology. So I think I'd agree with the general sense from the panel. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Tony. Okay, let's move on to our next question, and we're coming back now to Attilio Zanni from the Telecom Infra project. Attilio, what is your question, please?
Brilliant. Thanks, Ray. And that previous debate kind of ties very closely in with my question. I love the definitions provided by the expert panelists before for openness. And I think that's really important that we become more eloquent about what we mean when we talk about open. And I agree with all of their definitions. I think there's another component to this, and Tony was kind of alluding to the necessity for collaboration and an openness of methodology of building, defining technologies for the future. So setting collective requirements, presenting uniform technology roadmaps, and then sharing integrations and testing and validating together where it's necessary. So to what extent does the panel believe that telcos should work together with hyperscalers and governments to eliminate any unnecessary fragmentation in the industry, to reduce the encumbrance for vendors and for purchasers as well?
Okay, great question, Attilio. So can the industry come together around openness? Guy, over to you in the studio.
Thank you, Ray. We've got a couple of early takers. Let's go to Andrea first.
Yeah, it's absolutely indispensable that the industry comes together, because the way that the 5G and openness is conceived in terms of concept requires, for its very nature, for different players to come together and play to fully bring to light the full potential of 5G, for example. 5G, as we discussed earlier, is a programmable network. It's a network. It's a technology that is based on a programmable concept, and therefore the programmability, by its very nature, lends itself for different players to come and collaborate and work together in the ecosystem to bring the various aspects of those programmable network to life. If any one player thinks that they can do it alone, I think they're wrong. It's a combination of all of the players in the ecosystem that have to work together to bring the full potential to life.
Thank you, Andrea. An absolute necessity. Phil, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming from a position where I sell to telecoms companies around the world, and the observation I would make, I think there are formal ways of working and there are informal ways of working. So I think obviously you see the formal bodies such as ORAN, etc., where the telecoms companies and the standards bodies where the telecoms companies are coming together to drive a common approach. But then I think also informally, what we tend to find when you sell to telecoms companies is they recognize that in some particular markets, there are key players really pushing the technology forward. And so actually they tend to kind of informally observe and take note as to what some of these leading operators are doing around the world, and then somewhat informally follow them. So I think there's both a formal track and also an informal track to this.
Thank you very much, Phil. Well, look, let's head back to Ray, because hopefully we can squeeze in one, if not two more questions. Ray.
Yep, absolutely. I'm just going to come back to Attilio very quickly, though, because I'm sure he's got a very quick comment to say on this collaboration. It's very strong at tip, of course.
Yeah, so absolutely agree with the importance of the O-RAN Alliance and the Open RAN Policy Coalition, creating standards and making things secure from the get-go. Absolutely. I think there's a practical coming together, and what we're seeing is a latent demand for telcos and vendors alike to come together and actually, as we said, build together, we build, right? And that's with web scalers as well. So I think we can tip our hat to, yes, web scalers can play nicely as well. So that's a little bit of a plug for the next debate tomorrow, I think it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has been a year of collaboration. Absolutely. And it's becoming more common. Okay. In the gallery, as we know, we have Joe Watchell from Worldwide Technology. So, Joe, you've got a more specific question about a topic that we've already touched on. So what is your question for your peers here today?
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, in earlier questions, the topic of integration actually came up. And I'm wondering, from a service provider perspective, are they planning to take on the full responsibility for systems integration? Are they planning to work with partners? Do they expect vendors to handle that? How do they actually expect this integration to be accomplished?
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. So, Guy, back to you. Who is going to pick up this role, this integration role?
Good question, Joe. It's on all our lips. So, Howard, thank you very much. Let's hear what you and BT Group have to say.
I mean, I think, if I'm honest, I think it's going to evolve, and it's probably a little bit early to say yet. I do think, though, that we absolutely recognise that we'll probably have to pick up most of it, particularly around, being able to assert the security requirements that were discussed earlier. So my view is that the operators, will have to pick up the lion's share of this.
Thank you, Howard. Andrea, what about you and Vodafone?
Completely same view. We will need to have a front and center role in terms of the system integration. We will need to develop the skills to be able to do that across the whole breadth of the chain. And we'll also have to, I think, embrace a culture and mentality that ups the value add of that system integration. It will no longer be just a system integration in the traditional sense of piecing together new players, different players, but actually adding value in while stitching them together, which then brings me to the previous point I made in terms of the programmability of the network. If you piece together the various players in a very well thought through manner, bringing to life the full potential of the technology you're stitching together, you can actually expose all the benefits of all the pieces of the chain and add value to the end customer. If you transact the integration, simply transact the integration, then you're not adding value. And I think there's a great opportunity for operators to play a leading role in the integration, but with an eye on the programmability of that integration to add more value to industry and to the customers.
Thank you, Andrea. And across to Jean-Yves.
Yeah, maybe slightly different perspective on the matter. I think that as it pertains to the front end, i.e. the customer service, I think that's where several telcos, and particularly those that are multi-country telcos, will want to ensure the integration themselves to really build competitive advantage. As it relates to back-end systems in the network, I think that finding the right partners to do that effectively and efficiently is going to probably be the preferred matter. So I think it's not one model fits all. I think it's a mix and match depending on where a telecom operator wants to focus innovation and the capability in-house.
Thank you very much, Jean-Yves. And with that, and with the timer fast approaching the top of the hour, I think we best hand back to Ray.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. So we've had a great debate. The time has gone so quickly, but of course we want to know what our guests here today think of the motion. So let's just remind you of what the motion is before we get our thumbs up and thumbs down. The motion was: a more open telco is at odds with the simplification of the supplier roster. So for my friends here in the gallery today, can we get a thumbs up or thumbs down on that motion, please? Oh, okay. We are looking pretty much at a vote against here in general, but Andrew is voting for. So in general, the vote is against the motion. The vote is against, Guy. What about you back in the studio?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Well, let's find out. It's thumbs up, thumbs down time. A more open telco is at odds with the simplification of the supplier roster. Do we agree or do we disagree? Let's have a quick look now where we are. Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 2. Ooh, it's just, I would say it's just against. It's just touching against there, but it's pretty close. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. That's what we all think, but what about our audience? Was our motion carried or defeated? Well, it's time for the industry to decide. Whoa. There you have it. Motion defeated, but only just. I reckon there's some high probability of margin of error there in the voting. Chris, I know you and Graham arbitrarily decided who was going to speak for and against, but you argued for the motion. It looks like a slim majority of our viewers don't think that an open telco is at odds with a simplified supplier roster. What do you make of that?
I think it's indicative of the diverse opinions that we want to have around the debate. You know, the fact that we have relied heavily on a small number of suppliers in that sort of formerly proprietary environment, and that those suppliers are gradually perhaps moving into that more open environment. That's the way the market should go. You know, we want innovation, we want to drive changes, we want to see the coming together, the convergence of the network and the IT side. And as Attilio pointed out, the combination of cloud all coming together. So in a sense, it has to be a more open telco, and the supplier roster has to be open as long as the telco decides exactly what business it wants to be in. And I think that's part of this net discussion going forward is what role does that telco want to play and is able to play, and then working back from that as to exactly what the supplier infrastructure looks like going forward.
Yeah, personally, I would have expected the motion to have been defeated by a higher margin, but predicting polls is never easy, especially this year. Ray, I think I was voting along with your guests in your studio on this one. Any final thoughts from you on the motion result?
Well, I think the fact that it was so close means that it's actually a really critical question. Everybody wants that more diverse ecosystem, and certainly on the network operator side, that's for sure. But the key word in the motion, I think, is simplification. Will this lead to a more simpler vendor operator engagement and relationship? Let's see. It comes back to that SI question and how everything is going to come together. This is a topic that's going to go on for years, and it'll be interesting to see if we ask the same question in 2 years' time, what kind of response we would get. So a great motion to debate for sure.
Indeed. Well, let's file that away in my calendar for, 2022. Crikey. Right, now that is the second debate concluded, and indeed it's the end of our first day of the Great Telco Debate Live. And a reminder that we still have 2 further days of discussions covering 4 more debates. Check the website for details of timings and for your chance to submit a question. And if you haven't yet watched the witness statements, then please do so. You'll find them on the Great Telco Debate page on the TelecomTV website. The three of us will be back tomorrow with more returning expert witnesses and new guests. It's an earlier start for our European audience, 10 a.m. UK time, so that we can involve our viewers from Asia in the debate. And we'll have the whole show ready for on-demand viewing soon after. A big thank you to all our guests for taking part today and to all our sponsors and partners. But until tomorrow, from all of us at the Great Telco Debate, goodbye.